Hey there, welcome back. Tonight we're climbing high into the Swiss Alps, where the air bites crisp and thin, where a solitary philosopher wages war against his own failing body, and where some of the most revolutionary ideas in Western thought are being hammered out one agonizing word at a time. We're spending an ordinary day with Friedrich Nietzsche in Sils-Maria, Switzerland, sometime in the mid-1880s. Ordinary meaning debilitating migraines, hours of mountain walking in all weather, and philosophical insights that will shake the foundations of morality, religion, and human existence itself. But before we begin our ascent into these rarefied heights, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy this kind of deep dive into history. Now let's journey together into the punishing daily existence of one of philosophy's most tormented and brilliant minds. The first pale threads of light creep across the Engadin Valley, painting the high peaks in shades of ash and pearl. The darkness hasn't fully retreated, but it's beginning its grudging withdrawal, leaving behind that peculiar gray twilight that exists only in mountain country. In a modest room in a two-story house on Via da Marias, a figure stirs beneath thin blankets. Friedrich Nietzsche is already awake, though calling it awakening suggests he ever truly slept. At 40 years old, his nights are frequently interrupted by waves of nausea, splitting headaches, and an insomnia so profound it feels less like sleeplessness and more like being trapped in a twilight realm between consciousness and oblivion. But this morning, mercifully, the migraine that had threatened to bloom behind his eyes has not yet materialized into its full, debilitating force. He sits up slowly, every movement calculated to avoid triggering the beast that lurks in his skull. The room is Spartan in its simplicity. A narrow bed, a plain wooden table serving as a writing desk, a chair, a small wardrobe containing his modest collection of clothing. The walls are bare. There are no decorations, no comforts, nothing to distract from the work. This is not a home. This is a cell in which thought happens. The philosopher swings his legs out of bed, feet meeting the cold wooden floor. The chill shoots up through his body, a sharp reminder that he exists in the physical world, that he is not yet pure mind, floating free of bodily constraints. That perhaps will never be possible, much as his philosophy might wish otherwise. On a small table near the window sits a ceramic pitcher and basin. The water inside is mountain cold, probably hasn't warmed a single degree since it was filled yesterday evening. Nietzsche approaches it with the grim determination of a soldier advancing on enemy territory. He pours water into the basin, then plunges his hands in. The shock is immediate and total. His breath catches, his fingers go numb, but he doesn't withdraw. Instead, with Spartan rigor that would have impressed the ancient warriors whose ethics he so often contemplates, he splashes the freezing water onto his face again and again. Water runs down his cheeks, drips from his enormous mustache, that remarkable facial feature that has become inseparable from his image. The cold water is not luxury, it is necessity, it is awakening, it is the first small victory over the body's desire for comfort, for warmth, for ease. Already before the sun has fully risen, Friedrich Nietzsche is engaging in the practice of self-overcoming, that central concept that will later define his philosophy. The body protests, the will commands, the body submits. He dries his face with a rough towel, then examines himself briefly in a small mirror. The face that looks back is one marked by suffering. His eyes, always sensitive, are slightly puffy from troubled sleep. His skin has that peculiar pallor of someone who battles chronic illness. But there is also something else there, something fierce and uncompromising in the set of his jaw, the intensity of his gaze, even through spectacles that correct his terrible myopia. His landlord, the grocer who owns this building, has often marveled at Nietzsche's morning ritual. What kind of man, he wonders, chooses to begin each day with such harshness? What kind of man seems to welcome discomfort as other men welcome breakfast? But then, his lodger is not like other men. He keeps strange hours, eats strange foods, and spends his days doing something that produces no visible product, earns no obvious income, serves no clear purpose that a practical Swiss shopkeeper can discern. From a shelf, Nietzsche retrieves a small glass of warm milk that was prepared the night before. It is cooled to room temperature, but it's still more palatable than the mountain cold water. He drinks it slowly, carefully, aware that his stomach is a minefield of potential rebellion. Every meal, every beverage is a negotiation with a digestive system that has been in revolt for most of his adult life. The milk settles without incident. Small victory. The day can proceed. Beyond the window, Sils-Maria is beginning to wake. Somewhere a rooster crows, a dog barks. The tiny village, home to perhaps a few hundred souls during the summer season, starts its slow emergence into the day. But Nietzsche is already ahead of them. While they wake to tend shops, to milk cows, to go about the practical business of living, he wakes to think, to write, to push against the boundaries of human understanding. He dresses methodically, simple clothing, practical clothing, a white shirt, dark trousers, a vest, nothing fancy. Nietzsche, despite his aristocratic pretensions and his patrician philosophical stance, lives on a modest pension from the University of Basel, where his declining health forced his retirement at the young age of 34. That pension, 3,000 Swiss francs annually, is barely enough to maintain this peripatetic existence, moving from rented room to rented room, from Swiss village to Italian town, always following better weather, better air, better conditions for his treacherous health. As he buttons his shirt, he can already feel the familiar tightness beginning behind his right eye. The migraine, that constant companion, that ever-present threat, is stirring. Not fully manifesting yet, but announcing its presence, letting him know that it's there, waiting, ready to strike if he makes a wrong move, eats the wrong food, thinks too hard, exists too vigorously. He pauses, closes his eyes, breathes deeply. The cold mountain air fills his lungs. This air, this high, thin, alpine air, is one of the main reasons he's here. He has discovered through painful trial and error that this climate, harsh as it is, seems to afford him slightly better health than the lowlands. The cold is bracing, the altitude is challenging. But something about this combination seems to hold his symptoms slightly at bay, or at least to make them more bearable. The sky outside has lightened from gray to a pale, washed blue. The sun has not yet cleared the peaks to the east, but its approach is signaled by the gradual warming of colors, the slow awakening of the landscape. Nietzsche stands at his window and looks out at this valley that has become his refuge, his prison, his place of production. The view is spectacular. Lake Silvaplana lies to the northeast, its waters dark and still in the early morning. To the southwest is Lake Sils. Between them stretches this valley, this Fex Valley, with its dark pine forests, its high alpine meadows, its scattered buildings looking like toys in the immensity of the landscape. And everywhere, in every direction, mountains, enormous, ancient, indifferent mountains that dwarf human concerns, that put philosophical questions into a kind of cosmic perspective. Here, surrounded by this massive, timeless geology, Nietzsche feels both insignificant and strangely powerful. What are his thoughts against such permanence? What is human philosophy measured against mountains that have stood for millions of years? And yet, it is human thought that gives meaning to mountains, human consciousness that transforms geology into beauty, into symbol, into metaphor. He turns from the window. The day's first session of work awaits. On his small writing desk, paper sits ready. Pen and ink stand prepared. The tools are simple, almost primitive. But from these simple tools, from pen moving across paper in a room barely warmer than the outdoor air, will emerge ideas that will echo through the coming century, that will influence writers and artists and thinkers and dictators and revolutionaries. But he doesn't know that yet. Right now, in this moment, he is simply a sick man in his early 40s, living in isolation in a Swiss mountain village, trying to wrestle his thoughts into coherent form before his body betrays him once again. He sits at the desk, adjusts the paper, dips the pen, and begins. When Friedrich Nietzsche writes, he writes with his entire body. This is not a metaphor. This is a physiological fact. He leans forward over the desk, his nose inches from the paper, compensating for eyesight that has been failing since childhood. His right hand grips the pen with intensity that borders on violence, while his left hand presses flat against the desk, as if anchoring himself to the physical world, while his mind ranges into abstract territory. The act of writing, for Nietzsche, is inseparable from physical suffering. His severe myopia means he must bring his face close to the page, a posture that inevitably triggers neck strain, which in turn often precipitates the migraines. His hand cramps after extended periods. His eyes water and ache from the strain of focusing. Writing is not pleasure. Writing is combat. And yet, he writes. Every morning when his body permits, from the gray pre-dawn hours until approximately 11 o'clock, he writes. This morning session is sacrosanct, protected with religious fervor, despite his famous proclamation of God's death. The morning hours, he has learned through years of experimentation with his wrecked body, are his best hours, the time when his mind is clearest, when the migraines are least likely to strike with full force, when he can sustain concentration. The work that occupies him during this summer in Sils-Maria is ambitious beyond measure. He is in the midst of composing Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the book he will later call his greatest gift to humanity, the work that bridges centuries with its voice. It is part philosophy, part poetry, part prophecy. It follows the ancient Persian prophet, Zarathustra, as he descends from mountain solitude to share his wisdom with humanity, only to find that humanity neither wants nor understands his gifts. The irony is not lost on Nietzsche. He too has descended in a sense from the academic heights of his early career as a classical philologist. He too has insights he desperately wishes to share, and he too is finding that the world is largely indifferent to what he has to say. His books sell poorly. His ideas are misunderstood when they're noticed at all. He writes for a future audience, for readers not yet born, for a time when humanity might be ready to hear what he has to say. But this morning the writing flows with unusual ease. The pen scratches across the page, leaving trails of ink that form into words, into sentences, into paragraphs that will later be read by millions. He is working on Zarathustra's discourse on self-overcoming, that central Nietzschean concept that demands humans rise above themselves, transcend their current limitations, become something greater. The words come from somewhere deep, somewhere that feels both entirely his own and somehow beyond him. They carry weight, rhythm, a kind of biblical cadence that he's consciously imitating and subverting. Where the Bible offers commandments and comfort, Nietzsche offers challenges and discomfort. Where Christianity promises salvation through submission, his Zarathustra promises greatness through assertion. His hand moves faster now, almost unable to keep pace with the thoughts cascading through his mind. This is the paradox of his existence. His body fails him constantly, yet when the conditions align, when the migraine stays at bay for a few hours, when the stomach settles, when the eyes can focus, his mind produces with frightening intensity. Outside, full daylight has arrived. The sun has cleared the eastern peaks, sending shafts of brilliant light through his window. The light hits his desk, illuminating the pages covered with his handwriting, that distinctive script that will become familiar to scholars, dense and difficult, the physical manifestation of thoughts that resist easy comprehension. But the light also brings pain. As the sunlight strengthens, Nietzsche becomes aware of a worsening ache behind his eyes. The light sensitivity that accompanies his migraines is asserting itself. He shifts his position, trying to keep the sun from hitting his face directly, but it's no use. The headache, which has been lurking since he woke, is now advancing with purpose. He tries to continue writing, but the words are becoming difficult to see, difficult to form. His vision is starting to blur slightly at the edges, a warning sign he knows well. The migraine is coming, gathering strength, preparing to lay siege to his consciousness. He pushes on for another few minutes, determined to finish the thought he's developing, but finally must acknowledge defeat. The pen goes down. He leans back in his chair, closes his eyes, presses the heels of his hands against his eye sockets. The pressure provides a moment of relief, then the pain reasserts itself. This is the reality of Nietzsche's productive life. Not the romanticized image of the philosopher in inspired reverie, but this, a man fighting his own neurology, stealing hours of productive work between bouts of incapacitating illness, writing not from a position of physical strength, but from a position of desperate urgency, knowing that each day might bring collapse. He has been suffering from migraines since he was 9 years old. For over 3 decades, these attacks have shaped his life, dictated his movements, and limited his options. They come with warning signs sometimes, auras, and distortions of vision. Other times they strike without preamble. They can last hours or days. They bring nausea, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, and pain so severe that thought becomes impossible. His correspondence with his mother and sister is filled with reports of his health, detailed accounts of which foods triggered, which symptoms, which climates afforded him relief, and which treatments he's tried. He has experimented with vegetarianism, with various restrictive diets, with avoiding alcohol and coffee, with various medications and folk remedies. Some things help slightly. Nothing cures. The medical understanding of his time is limited. Doctors have offered various diagnoses, various theories. Some think his problems stem from his eyes. Others suspect his stomach. Still others point to hereditary factors. His father died young from a brain condition that may have been similar to what afflicts the son. But whatever the root cause, the result is the same: a brilliant mind shackled to a failing body. He sits now, eyes still closed, breathing carefully, trying to prevent the headache from escalating into a full migraine. Sometimes this works. Sometimes careful rest at the first signs can forestall the worst. Other times it's inevitable, and he knows he'll spend the next 12 or 24 hours in darkened room, vomiting. Unable to think, unable to read, unable to do anything but endure. But today, after 10 or 15 minutes of stillness, the pain seems to stabilize. It doesn't retreat, but it doesn't advance either. This is acceptable. This is workable. He has learned to function with background pain, to think through discomfort, to produce despite his body's rebellion. He opens his eyes carefully, allowing them to adjust to the light. His desk awaits. The pages covered in morning's work sit there, testament to the hours of struggle. He looks at them with mixed feelings. Is this any good? Will anyone ever read it? Does it matter? The questions are not rhetorical. Nietzsche genuinely doesn't know if he's producing works of genius or the ravings of an isolated madman. He has no real peer review, no philosophical community offering feedback. He left academia years ago, burned bridges with former colleagues, alienated himself from the very people who might have understood his work. He sends his books to publishers who accept them reluctantly, sell few copies, offer little encouragement. His isolation is not just geographical, living in remote mountain villages. It's intellectual, living in ideas that his contemporaries don't grasp. It's social, cut off from the normal networks of professional and personal connection. And it's emotional, battling not just physical illness, but periods of profound depression, of questioning whether this suffering serves any purpose. But he cannot stop. Even if he wanted to, even if he decided to abandon philosophy and live a quiet life of simple pleasures, he's not sure he could. The thinking happens whether he wills it or not. The ideas come unbidden. His mind works in ways he doesn't fully control, pursuing questions, overturning assumptions, challenging everything he was taught. He glances at the clock, nearly 11. His morning writing session, abbreviated by the headache, is ending anyway. This is the rhythm he's established through painful trial. Write until 11, then walk, then return for afternoon writing if health permits, then walk again. The walking is not recreation, it's necessity, it's therapy, it's where the thinking happens. He gathers the morning's pages, stacks them neatly, places them in a folder. Tomorrow, if he's able, he'll review them, revise them, build on them. But for now, they're done. He has wrested these thoughts from the chaos of consciousness and pinned them to paper. They exist outside his head now, independent of his failing body, ready to outlive him. He stands slowly, testing his balance. The headache pulses but remains manageable. His stomach is quiet, not threatening rebellion. His eyes ache but still function. By the standards of his existence, this counts as a good morning. The day, however, is far from over. The real work, in some ways, is about to begin. Because for Friedrich Nietzsche, walking is not escape from philosophy. Walking is philosophy. Walking is where the body and mind work in concert, where motion generates thought, where the next section of Zarathustra will reveal itself. He moves to the door, retrieves his hat, his gray-green parasol that shields his sensitive eyes from mountain sun, and his small notebook, always the notebook, where he'll record whatever insights arise during the hours ahead. Time to walk. The door of the house on Via da Marias closes behind him with a soft click, and Friedrich Nietzsche steps into the Alpine day. The contrast between the dim interior and the brilliant mountain light is shocking, even with his eyes somewhat adjusted. He immediately tilts the parasol to shield his face, casting himself in artificial shade, a moving island of shadow in the sea of sunlight. The air hits him like a physical substance, thin and cold and impossibly clean. This is air that has never known pollution, never been breathed by crowds, never passed through city streets. This is wind that has traveled over glaciers and through high passes, carrying with it the mineral scent of rock and the resinous smell of pine. He inhales deeply, filling his lungs, feeling the coldness all the way down. Sils-Maria at mid-morning is quiet. A few villagers go about their business, a woman hanging laundry, taking advantage of the rare sunny day before afternoon clouds roll in, a farmer leading a cow toward pasture, children's voices from somewhere high and bright. They glance at the philosopher as he passes, this strange gentleman from Germany who lives here summer after summer, who walks for hours regardless of weather, who speaks little and keeps to himself. They think him odd, probably. Definitely odd. But Swiss mountain folk are pragmatic. He pays his rent. He causes no trouble. His oddness is his own business. They nod politely when he passes, and he nods back, but there's no real communication. He lives among them, but not with them, exists in their physical space while inhabiting a completely different mental universe. His feet know the way almost automatically now. After multiple summers here, after hundreds of hours walking these paths, his body has memorized the route. His conscious mind can drift while his legs carry him forward, stepping over roots, navigating rocky sections, maintaining the steady rhythm that will carry him through the next 2 hours. He heads northeast toward the forest that slopes up from the village. The path is narrow, barely wider than his shoulders, worn smooth by centuries of use. Farmers have walked this way driving cattle. Woodcutters have walked it carrying tools. And now a philosopher walks it, carrying questions about existence itself. The forest closes around him, pine and larch, creating a cathedral of green and brown, shot through with pillars of sunlight, where gaps in the canopy allow light to penetrate. The temperature drops immediately in the shade, and Nietzsche is grateful for it. The coolness is easier on his head, less likely to trigger the migraine that still lurks behind his eyes. As he walks, his mind begins to work in that peculiar way that only happens during these excursions. Thoughts that were stuck suddenly unstick. Ideas that seem disconnected begin to connect. The rhythm of his footsteps creates a rhythm in his thinking, regular and insistent, carrying him forward mentally as his legs carry him forward physically. He's thinking about power, about will, about what drives human beings to act as they do. These concepts that will later be central to his philosophy are still forming, still finding their shape. The will to power, that idea that will be so profoundly misunderstood by later readers, is not yet fully crystallized. But walking, thinking, it's beginning to take form. The path climbs gradually, working its way up the slope of the valley. His breathing deepens with the exertion, but this is good exertion, healthy exertion. His doctors, the various physicians he's consulted over the years, have all recommended exercise. Walking, they agree, seems to help his condition. The exact mechanism they can't explain, but the result is observable. On days when he walks extensively, his symptoms are somewhat better. On days when he's confined to bed, they're worse. But it's more than just physical therapy. Walking for Nietzsche has become a philosophical practice, almost a spiritual discipline in its own right. He has written that one should trust no thought that wasn't born in the open air, that sedentary life is the real sin against the Holy Spirit. For him, thinking is not an armchair activity. It's an athletic event. The notebook in his pocket bumps against his thigh with each step. Several times he's already paused to pull it out, to jot down a phrase that occurred to him, a formulation that seemed particularly apt. The notebook is filled with these fragments, these lightning strikes of thought that will later be assembled into published works. Future scholars will pore over these notebooks, trying to reconstruct the development of his ideas, but right now they're just tools, receptacles for thoughts that can't be trusted to memory. He reaches a section of the path where it emerges from the forest onto a small meadow, offering a view down into the valley. He pauses, not because he's tired, but because the view seems to demand it, seems to require acknowledgement. Below him, the village is tiny, the houses like children's blocks. The lake stretches beyond, still and dark. And everywhere, always, the mountains, those massive presences that frame every vista, that dominate every view. In the presence of such scale, such timelessness, human concerns seem almost comically small. What does his headache matter against the age of these mountains? What do his philosophical questions matter in the face of such massive, uncaring geology? And yet the paradox again. It's precisely human consciousness that gives meaning to mountains, that transforms stone into symbol, that sees in nature mirrors of human concerns. Zarathustra, his fictional prophet, retreats to the mountains, ascends to high places, seeks wisdom in elevation. This is no accident. Nietzsche, writing about Zarathustra while living in the mountains, understands the metaphor experientially. Height offers perspective. Difficulty offers a challenge. Isolation offers clarity. Or at least, it can. Or at least, he hopes it does. He's been walking for about 45 minutes now, and he can feel his body starting to respond as it always does. The initial stiffness is gone. His breathing has found its rhythm. The headache, miraculously, has receded slightly, as if motion and fresh air have convinced it to withdraw, at least temporarily. This is the window, the precious few hours when his body and mind can work together rather than against each other. The path re-enters the forest darker and cooler. A stream runs alongside, invisible but audible, adding its voice to the rustle of wind in the pines. The sound is hypnotic, almost meditative. Walking, breathing, listening, thinking, it all merges into a kind of mobile meditation, a moving stillness. He's thinking now about Christianity, about the religion he was raised in and has so thoroughly rejected. Thinking about how it teaches humanity to despise the body, to see physical existence as fallen, as something to be overcome through spiritual transcendence. And he's thinking about how wrong this is, how backwards, how it turns healthy humans into guilt-ridden neurotics. His philosophy, still forming, still finding its voice, will offer something different. Not transcendence of the body, but affirmation of it. Not escape from physical existence, but embrace of it. This is the message of Zarathustra, of the Übermensch, of all his work. Remain faithful to the earth. Don't seek meaning in some imagined afterlife. Find meaning here, now, in this world, this body, this moment. But it's hard. God, it's hard. Because his body is not some glorious vehicle of earthly pleasure. His body is a betrayer, a torture device, a constraint. Remaining faithful to the earth when the earth has given you a body that barely functions requires a kind of heroic will that borders on madness. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the affirmation of life has to be strong enough to include even this. Even suffering, even illness, even the possibility that consciousness is a curse rather than a gift. He stops suddenly, struck by a thought, pulls out the notebook, writes quickly before the thought can escape. What does not kill me makes me stronger. The phrase seems right, seems to capture something essential about his experience. It will be misunderstood, of course, taken as simple self-help advice, as motivation poster wisdom. But right now, in this moment, writing it on a mountainside in Switzerland while battling chronic illness, it's not a platitude. It's a prayer, a hope, a desperate assertion that all this suffering must mean something, must be building towards something. He puts the notebook away and continues walking. The path begins to descend slightly, working its way around the shoulder of the mountain. His knees complain slightly at the downhill angle, but it's manageable. Everything is manageable if you refuse to let it stop you. The walk will continue for another hour at least, maybe longer if he's feeling strong. He'll make a large loop, perhaps passing by Lake Silvaplana, perhaps heading toward the pyramidal stone that has become significant to him, that place where one of his most important insights struck him. Or maybe he'll choose a different route today, explore a path he hasn't taken before, see what thoughts arise in unfamiliar territory. The beauty of these walks is their openness, their lack of predetermined destination. He's not walking to get somewhere. He's walking to think, to be, to exist in motion. The destination is whatever thoughts arise along the way, whatever insights the rhythm of his footsteps shakes loose from his consciousness. Above him, clouds are beginning to form as they do most afternoons in the mountains. By later today, they'll probably bring rain, maybe even snow if the temperature drops. But for now, the sky is still mostly clear, a blue so deep and pure it almost hurts to look at. Friedrich Nietzsche walks on, a solitary figure in an immense landscape, thinking thoughts that will echo through the coming century, thoughts that will inspire and horrify, thoughts that will be quoted and misquoted, understood and misunderstood. But right now, he's just a sick man taking a walk, trying to steal a few hours of productive thinking from a body that doesn't want to cooperate. The forest path stretches ahead, disappearing around a bend. His legs carry him forward. His mind races ahead even faster, leaping from thought to thought, building structures of ideas that will later be built into paragraphs, chapters, books. He walks. And in walking, he philosophizes. And in philosophizing, he walks. They're inseparable, two aspects of a single activity, motion and thought merged into one continuous act of creation. The morning walk continues, and with it, the endless work of trying to think clearly, despite a body determined to prevent it. By the time Nietzsche returns to his modest lodgings, the sun stands high overhead, having climbed to that brief alpine zenith before beginning its descent. His legs are tired, but pleasantly so, the kind of fatigue that comes from use rather than abuse. His notebook, pulled from his pocket multiple times during the walk, now contains several pages of new entries, thoughts captured before they could evaporate into the mountain air. The landlord's wife nods to him as he enters. She's used to his comings and goings by now, this strange tenant who keeps such unusual hours, who speaks little, who asks for such peculiar foods. She's learned not to take his silence personally. Some men are simply made for solitude. Nietzsche climbs the stairs to his room slowly, mindful of the headache that has been his companion all morning, lurking but not quite striking. Each step is taken with care, as if sudden movement might trigger the beast. He reaches his door, enters his Spartan chamber, and immediately removes his hat and parasol, placing them on their hooks with the precision of ritual. The room feels almost claustrophobically small after the expansiveness of the mountains. The ceiling seems to press down. The walls feel too close, but this is temporary. After lunch and a brief rest, he'll venture out again and the world will open up once more. For now, he must eat. The body demands fuel even when eating is one of the most complicated and fraught activities of his day. His dietary regimen has been refined through years of painful experimentation. He has learned, through countless episodes of gastric distress, through endless trial and error, which foods his troubled digestive system will tolerate and which will provoke rebellion. The list of acceptable foods is short and peculiar, making him a difficult guest at any normal table, one of the many reasons he dines alone. Today's lunch is typical, a simple preparation arranged by his landlady according to his specifications. A small portion of lean meat, barely seasoned, some plain boiled vegetables. Bread, but not too much bread, and certainly not the heavy German bread of his homeland, which he's convinced makes him feel sluggish and dull. Water, cold from the mountain spring that feeds the village. He eats slowly, methodically, aware that rushed eating invariably leads to stomach trouble. Each bite is chewed thoroughly, almost meditated upon. This is not pleasure. This is careful negotiation with an uncooperative digestive system. Food is fuel, nothing more, and fuel that must be measured and monitored with the attention one might give to dosing medicine. In his correspondence with his mother, he frequently discusses food, requests shipments of specific items that he's decided agree with him. Ham sausage, particularly the Lachs Schinken she sends, has become a staple. Ginger, which he believes settles his stomach. Nuts. Fruit, though only certain kinds, and not too much. His letters read like those of an anxious child, except the child is a 40-year-old philosopher who has thought more deeply about human existence than almost anyone alive. But food is not just physiological for Nietzsche, it's philosophical. He has written about the relationship between diet and thought, arguing that what we eat shapes not just our bodies, but our minds, our ability to think clearly, our philosophical capacity. German cooking, he's convinced, has produced German heaviness of thought, German inability to think with the lightness and grace he admires in French thinkers. The best cooking, he believes, comes from Piedmont, the Italian region whose cuisine he sampled during his winters in Turin and Genoa. As he eats, he can feel his body's response to each mouthful. The meat settles acceptably, the vegetables cause no immediate distress, the bread in small quantities seems tolerable, the water is cold and clean and causes no problems. So far, so good. But the meal's not over until several hours have passed and his stomach has pronounced its verdict. Until then, he remains cautiously optimistic. He finishes eating and sits quietly for a few minutes, hands folded on the table, waiting to see if any symptoms develop. This post-meal vigil has become habit. Rush into activity too soon after eating, and trouble almost always follows. But sit quietly. Let digestion begin undisturbed, and sometimes, the meal passes without incident. The room is very quiet. Outside, the village continues its life, but at this hour many are also at their midday meal, and the usual sounds of activity have temporarily ceased. He can hear his own breathing, can hear the faint sound of wind outside, can hear the creaking of the building settling. Loneliness settles over him, like a physical presence. This is the other constant of his existence, alongside pain. The isolation is not accidental. He has chosen this, has deliberately separated himself from society, from colleagues, from friends. But choice doesn't make it easy. Choice doesn't fill the emptiness that comes from having no one to talk to, no one who understands his work, no one who shares his daily existence. He has correspondents, people he writes to with some regularity. His mother and sister, though their relationship is complicated and often strained. A few former students. A handful of admirers who've read his work. But these are distant connections, letters that take days or weeks to arrive, conversations conducted at the speed of the postal service. There is no one here, no one in this village, no one within reach, who could be called a companion. The famous friendship with Richard Wagner ended years ago in bitter mutual disappointment. Wagner, the composer Nietzsche once idolized, revealed himself to be something other than the revolutionary artist Nietzsche had imagined. Their break was acrimonious and complete. The brief, intense intellectual friendship with Lou Andreas Salome ended in heartbreak and humiliation. His marriage proposal rejected, his ideas misunderstood. He fled that situation with wounds that haven't fully healed. Now he is, as he has called himself, the hermit of Sils-Maria. And hermitage, he's discovering, is not the romantic solitude of artistic isolation. It's this: eating alone in a small room, with no one to discuss the meal with, no one to share observations about the day's walk with, no one to test ideas against. He stands, carefully testing his balance and his stomach's response. Both seem stable. The meal has been successfully negotiated. Another small victory in the endless war his body wages against itself. There is time before his afternoon walk for a brief rest. Not sleep exactly. His sleep schedule is too disrupted for true napping. But a period of horizontal rest. Eyes closed, body still, mind quieting as much as it ever does. He lies on his narrow bed, hands folded on his chest, staring at the ceiling. The headache is still there. A dull presence, but it hasn't worsened. His stomach is quiet. His legs are pleasantly tired from the morning walk. By his standards, by the brutal standards of his existence, he's feeling relatively well. Thoughts drift through his mind, less organized than during his formal writing sessions, more associative. Fragments of morning's work. Plans for afternoon's writing. Ideas for tomorrow's walk. The contents of a letter he needs to write to his publisher. The question of whether to extend his stay here into September or to relocate to Italy earlier this year. But underneath all these practical thoughts runs a deeper current, the ever-present philosophical questions that never leave him. What is the meaning of human existence? What happens to ethics when you remove God as foundation? How should one live when traditional answers no longer satisfy? What comes after Christianity? These are not abstract questions for him. They're desperately personal. He's living in the aftermath of his own loss of faith, navigating a world without the comforting structures of religious belief. He's trying to figure out how to live, how to think, how to create meaning in a universe that increasingly seems meaningless. The eternal recurrence, that idea that struck him like lightning on one of these walks, haunts him still. The thought that this life, this exact life with all its suffering and all its small triumphs, might recur eternally, might be lived over and over without end. Can he say yes to that? Can anyone? What would it mean to live in such a way that you could affirm every moment? Even the painful ones, even the lonely ones, even the sick ones. He lies on his bed in a small room in a Swiss village, a failed academic living on a modest pension. His books largely unread, his ideas largely ignored, his body largely uncooperative. And he's trying to figure out how to say yes to this, how to affirm this, how to make of this life something that could be lived again without complaint. It's almost laughable, the absurdity of it. A sick man trying to teach healthy living, an isolated man trying to teach community, a suffering man trying to teach joy. But maybe that's the only way philosophy can happen, from the perspective of lack, from the position of need, from the place of desperate searching. Time passes. The room grows slightly warmer as afternoon sunlight finds its way through the window. Nietzsche remains on the bed, not sleeping but resting, conserving energy for the afternoon ahead. Because the day is far from over. The afternoon walk still awaits, longer and more demanding than the morning's excursion. And there will be more writing, more thinking, more wrestling with ideas and illness. But for now, this moment of rest, this brief pause, this temporary cessation of the endless forward motion that characterizes his existence. Outside, clouds continue to gather. Rain is coming, as it so often does in the afternoon here. But for now, the sun still shines, and Friedrich Nietzsche lies in a small room, gathering strength for whatever comes next. By 2 o'clock, Nietzsche is ready for his second expedition of the day. This afternoon walk will be longer, more ambitious, and more physically demanding than the morning's ramble. He retrieves his threadbare jacket, necessary protection against the cooling mountain air, and his gray-green parasol, though the increasing cloud cover suggests he may not need it for sun protection. Still, habit insists he carry it. It has become almost an extension of himself, this parasol, a marker by which village children recognize him from a distance. He steps outside into the air that has transformed since morning. The brilliance is gone, replaced by a softer, more diffuse light filtering through clouds that have thickened and lowered. The mountains across the valley are partially obscured, their peaks disappearing into gray. Rain is definitely coming, probably within the next few hours. A sensible person would stay indoors. But Nietzsche has learned that waiting for perfect weather in the Alps means waiting forever. He sets out at a deliberate pace. Not hurried, but purposeful. His destination today, if destinations matter on these philosophical rambles, is Lake Silvaplana, about 30 minutes to the north. More specifically, he's heading toward a particular location on the lake's shore, a place that has become sacred to him in the way places can become sacred to non-believers. Not through divine presence, but through personal significance, through the weight of experience accumulated there. The path leads down from the village toward the valley floor, then follows the course of a small stream toward the lake. The going is easy at first, well-worn and gently graded. He passes a farmer mending a fence, who nods without speaking. They've established this wordless relationship, the philosopher and the farmer, two men who share a landscape but not a language. As he walks, Nietzsche feels his body settling into rhythm again. The brief rest after lunch has restored some energy, and his legs remember the movements from morning. The headache, ever present, remains at its low level, not growing but not shrinking either. He's learned to work with this level of pain, to think through it, to not let it stop him. Pain that would send most people to bed is for him simply the background condition of existence. The stream beside the path chatters and burbles, swollen with meltwater from high glaciers. The sound is companionable, a kind of conversation that requires no response. He sometimes thinks he prefers the company of streams to the company of humans. Streams don't misunderstand. Streams don't judge. Streams simply flow, following the path of least resistance, exactly as nature intended. The path breaks out of trees, and suddenly the lake is before him, enormous and dark, its surface ruffled by wind into countless small waves. Lake Silvaplana stretches away to the northeast, bounded by steep mountains that rise directly from its shores. The water is the color of steel reflecting the cloud-darkened sky. It looks cold and deep and somehow ancient, as if it holds memories of the ice ages that carved these valleys. Nietzsche follows the lakeshore path, working his way toward a specific spot he's visited many times before. His feet know the way almost without conscious direction. The wind coming off the water is strong and cold, cutting through his jacket, but he welcomes it. The cold keeps him alert, keeps the drowsiness that sometimes follows meals at bay. And after perhaps 20 minutes of walking along the shore, he reaches his destination. A place where a massive rock formation rises from the earth like a pyramid, tilted slightly, dominating the landscape. This is the pyramidal stone, the place where in August of 1881 the idea of eternal recurrence struck him with such force that his world fundamentally altered. He approaches the stone with something like reverence. In later years, when walking past this place with companions, he will fall silent, as if entering a holy precinct. Even now alone he feels the weight of this location, the sense that something profound happened here, that the boundary between his before and after runs through this exact spot. He finds a place to sit on a smaller rock near the base of the pyramid, sheltered slightly from the wind. From here he can see the lake stretching away, can see the clouds moving across the sky, can see the entirety of the landscape that witnessed his revelation. The setting is desolate in the way high mountains are desolate, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. The thought that came to him here was this: what if everything recurs? What if this moment, this exact moment, will repeat eternally? What if you will live this life not once but infinite times, experiencing the same joys and sorrows, the same triumphs and failures, again and again without end? The thought was terrifying, it still is, because his life is not one that most people would choose to live even once, let alone eternally. A life of chronic pain, of isolation, of struggle and poverty and constant illness. To imagine living this eternally would seem like a curse, like the worst kind of damnation. But Nietzsche, sitting beside this stone on that August day 4 years ago, found a way to say yes to it, or at least found the challenge in saying yes to it. The eternal recurrence became for him a kind of test. Could you live your life in such a way that you would be willing to live it again exactly as it is, infinite times? And if not, what would have to change? How would you have to live differently? It's not about belief in literal recurrence. It's about using the idea as a way to evaluate life, to sort the meaningful from the meaningless, to identify what's truly worth affirming. It's about amor fati, love of fate, embracing everything that happens, even the difficult things, especially the difficult things, because they're part of what makes you who you are. Sitting here now, Nietzsche tests himself against this idea again. This day, this ordinary day of writing and walking and eating in pain, could he affirm this eternally? The work went well this morning. The walk has been good. The headache is manageable. By his standards, this is not a bad day. Yes, he thinks, yes, I could live this day again. I could say yes to this. But even as the thought forms, doubt creeps in. It's easy to affirm pleasant moments. But what about the bad days? The days when migraines prevent all work? The days when loneliness becomes unbearable? The days when he questions whether any of this effort means anything? Could he affirm those eternally? The wind gusts stronger, and the first drops of rain begin to fall, cold and sporadic. He needs to start back if he wants to avoid getting soaked. But he sits a moment longer, unwilling to leave this place, this spot where his philosophy crystallized into its most challenging form. Finally he stands. His legs are stiff from sitting, and he takes a moment to stretch them, to prepare for the walk back. The rain is increasing, no longer isolated drops, but a steady drizzle. He'll be wet by the time he reaches his lodgings, but that's acceptable. He's been wetter before. The walk back is faster than the walk out, driven partly by the rain and partly by the knowledge that evening, writing time awaits. His mind is full again, churning with thoughts, turning over ideas that arose during the walk, during the silent meditation beside the pyramidal stone. This is the fruit of walking, these cascades of thought that seem to come from the rhythm of footsteps, from the motion of the body through space. By the time he reaches the village, he's thoroughly damp. Rain has soaked through his thin jacket, plastered his hair to his skull, dripped from his mustache. He must look like a drowned philosopher, bedraggled and wet. But he feels alive in a way that sitting in dry comfort never makes him feel. The body, pushed into weather, into the elements, into discomfort, responds with a kind of vitality that ease never produces. He climbs the stairs to his room, leaving wet footprints on the wood. Inside he changes into dry clothes, hangs the wet ones to dry. His body is tired now, genuinely tired. Having walked for perhaps 4 or 5 hours total, between morning and afternoon, his legs ache pleasantly, his feet are sore. The headache, surprisingly, seems to have not worsened despite the exertion in the rain, but there's no time for extended rest. Evening is approaching, and with it, the second writing session of the day. If his body cooperates, if the headache doesn't escalate, if his stomach remains quiet, he has perhaps 2 or 3 hours of productive work ahead before exhaustion forces him to stop. He sits at his desk, the same desk where he sat this morning a lifetime ago. Fresh paper awaits. The pen is ready. Outside, rain drums steadily on the roof, creating a rhythmic backdrop that's almost soothing. The room is cool, probably too cool, but he's learned to prefer cold to warmth. Warmth makes him drowsy, while cold keeps him alert. He dips the pen in ink and begins to write. The words that flow now are different from morning's work, shaped by the hours of walking, by the meditation beside the stone, by the physical exertion and the rain and the 1,000 small experiences of the day. This is why he walks, not despite the writing, but for the writing. The walking feeds the writing, provides it with raw material, with embodied thoughts that could never arise from pure cerebration. The afternoon walk is over. The evening's work has begun. And Friedrich Nietzsche, wet and cold and tired and still fighting his ever-present headache, settles into the only activity that makes all the rest bearable, the transformation of suffered experience into written philosophy. The light in Nietzsche's room gradually dims as afternoon slides into evening, the gray rain light fading toward darkness. He lights the oil lamp on his desk, adjusting the wick until the flame settles into steady brightness. The lamp casts a small circle of warm light, barely enough to illuminate his page, leaving the corners of the room in shadow. This is his world now, reduced to this tiny sphere of visibility, this patch of paper where his hand moves, where ink transforms into words. The evening writing session has a different character from the morning's work. In the morning, his mind is fresh but sometimes sluggish, needing to warm up to find its way into the day's thoughts. In the evening, exhausted from walking, His consciousness operates in a state of heightened receptivity, almost trance-like. The physical fatigue seems to quiet some critical faculty, allowing thoughts to flow with less interference, less self-doubt. He's working now on integrating ideas that arose during the afternoon walk, trying to capture the insight that came to him beside the pyramidal stone. But the insight is elusive, hard to pin down in words. It's a feeling more than a thought, a kind of emotional commitment to the idea of eternal recurrence, a sense of yes that exists before rational articulation. This is the perpetual frustration of philosophy, he thinks, especially his kind of philosophy. He's not doing academic philosophy, not constructing logical proofs or systematic arguments. He's doing something more like poetry, trying to evoke states of consciousness, trying to inspire readers to think and feel differently. But how do you write that? How do you put onto paper something that can only truly be experienced? His hand cramps. He pauses, flexes his fingers, trying to work out the tension. The act of writing itself has become painful over the years, not just mentally, but physically. His grip on the pen is too tight. He knows, but he can't seem to loosen it. The intensity with which he approaches everything extends even to how he holds writing implements. He recently acquired a typewriter, a remarkable mechanical device that allows writing without pen and ink. He's experimented with it, found it helpful for his failing eyesight, but he doesn't truly trust it. There's something about the direct connection between hand and pen and paper that feels essential to thinking. The typewriter makes letters all the same size, all equally weighted. The pen responds to pressure, to speed, to mood. His handwriting is part of his thinking, not separate from it. Outside, the rain continues. The sound is hypnotic, a white noise that helps him concentrate. Inside, the room is very cold now. Cold enough that he can see his breath in the lamplight. He should put on another layer, should do something to warm himself, but he doesn't want to break his concentration. Cold is acceptable. Cold is preferable to the alternative, which is stopping. The page before him slowly fills with his distinctive script, dense and difficult, words crowding against each other as if there's never enough space for all the thoughts demanding expression. He writes about self-overcoming again, about the necessity of rising above one's current state, about refusing to accept limitations as final. But even as he writes about strength, about overcoming, he's acutely aware of his own weakness, his own multiple failures to overcome. His body will not be overcome. His isolation will not be overcome. His poverty will not be overcome. He's writing about becoming the Übermensch from the position of someone who can barely manage to be a functional human. Is this hypocrisy? He doesn't think so. He's not claiming to have achieved what he's describing. He's not presenting himself as the model. He's describing an ideal, a possibility, a direction to strive toward. The fact that he falls short doesn't invalidate the ideal. If anything, it makes the ideal more necessary, more urgent. The lamp flickers slightly, and he adjusts it again. The oil is running low. He'll need to refill it soon, but not yet, not while the writing is still flowing. He can work in dimmer light if necessary. He's done it before. His mind drifts to his correspondence, the letters he needs to write. He owes his publisher a response about the poor sales of his last book. He needs to write to his mother about sending more supplies, specifically the ham sausage he's running low on. There's a letter from a reader, one of the very few people who's actually read his work, that deserves a response. But the letters will have to wait. The philosophy comes first. It always comes first. What is he trying to do, really, with all this writing? What's the goal? He sometimes thinks he's trying to create a new way of being human, to offer humanity a path forward after the death of God. Christianity is dying, he's convinced of this, even if most people haven't noticed yet. The whole moral framework that has governed Western civilization for 2,000 years is crumbling, and something needs to replace it, or chaos will follow. But what should replace it? Not another religion, another set of commandments handed down from some imagined authority. What's needed is a radical revaluation of all values, a complete rethinking of what it means to live well, to be good, to find meaning. And that's what he's trying to provide, or at least to begin, with these books that almost nobody reads. The irony is crushing sometimes. He's writing for future generations, for readers not yet born, because his contemporaries show no interest. But how can he know if future readers will care? What if he's wrong? What if these ideas that feel so urgent, so necessary, so revolutionary, are actually just the ravings of an isolated crank? No. He pushes the doubt away. Not because he has certainty, but because doubt serves no purpose. He has to proceed as if the work matters, as if these words being scratched onto paper in a cold room in a Swiss village will somehow reach the readers they need to reach, whenever that might be. His eyes are burning now, strain added to the ever-present headache. He's been staring at paper and lamplight for hours. His vision is starting to blur at the edges, and he knows he's approaching his limit. Much longer, and he won't be able to see the words he's writing, let alone think clearly about what they mean. He writes one more paragraph, pushing through the exhaustion, determined to complete the thought he's developing. The paragraph is about joy, about the possibility of joy even in the midst of suffering, especially in the midst of suffering. Joy not as pleasure's opposite of pain, but as affirmation's opposite of negation, the joy of saying yes to life despite everything life contains. Finally, the paragraph ends. He sets down the pen. His hand is shaking slightly from fatigue. He leans back in his chair, closing his eyes, letting them rest from the strain of reading his own handwriting in dim light. The day's work is done, not because he's satisfied, not because he said everything that needs saying, but because his body has reached its limit. This is always how it ends, not with completion, but with exhaustion, with the recognition that he can't continue without damaging himself further. He looks at the pages produced today, morning and evening sessions combined, perhaps 5 or 6 pages, dense with text. By normal standards, this is good productivity. By his standards, knowing how much remains to be written, how many ideas still wait for expression, it feels inadequate. But it's what was possible today, and that has to be enough. He tidies the papers, stores them carefully in their folder. Tomorrow, if health permits, he'll review them, revise them, continue building the work that will eventually become Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the book he'll later call the greatest gift ever given to humanity. But tonight, the gift looks like a few crumpled pages in a folder, the product of a sick man's obsessive labor. Time for the evening's simple meal, then whatever hours remain before sleep, or before the attempt at sleep, which is never quite the same thing. Nietzsche's evening meal is even simpler than his lunch, a deliberate choice based on the uncomfortable truth that his stomach tolerates less food as the day progresses. By evening, his digestive system seems to retreat from engagement with the physical world, wanting only to be left alone, to process what's already been consumed without the burden of new material. Tonight's fare consists of little more than an egg, soft-boiled, a small piece of bread, and weak tea. His landlady brings it up on a tray, knocks softly, and leaves it outside his door, having learned that he prefers not to interact during meals. He retrieves the tray, carries it inside, and sets it on the small table by the window that serves multiple purposes: eating surface, writing desk, the place where he conducts his correspondence. He eats mechanically, without pleasure or attention, his mind still half occupied with the evening's writing. The egg is acceptable, bland, and easy to digest. The bread sits heavier, and he eats only half of what's provided. The tea is warm and soothing, and he drinks it slowly, feeling it settle into his stomach like a gentle reassurance. The meal takes perhaps 10 minutes. Then the tray is placed outside the door for collection, and he returns to the table, this time to tackle the small stack of letters that has accumulated. Correspondence is both burden and lifeline for Nietzsche. It's his primary connection to the world beyond Sils-Maria, his way of maintaining the human contacts that his isolation otherwise severs. But it's also draining, requiring energy he often doesn't have, demanding engagement with people and concerns that feel distant from his real work. Tonight there are 3 letters requiring responses. The first is from his mother, Franziska, a woman he loves and resents in equal measure. Her letters are filled with maternal concern, questions about his health, his diet, his living conditions. She worries constantly, and her worry manifests as a kind of smothering attention that he finds both touching and suffocating. He reads her letter by lamplight. She wants to know if he's eating properly, if he's warm enough, if he needs anything sent. She's heard from his sister Elizabeth that he's been unwell again, and she's concerned. Can she send more of the ham sausage he likes? Does he need warmer clothes as autumn approaches? Nietzsche picks up his pen, dips it in ink, and begins to compose a response. His letters to his mother are careful, measured, designed to reassure without revealing too much. He tells her he's well, or as well as can be expected. Yes, the sausage would be appreciated. No, he doesn't need warmer clothes yet. The walking is helping his health, as it always does. He's making good progress on his work. He doesn't tell her about the headaches, the nausea, the days when he can barely function. He doesn't tell her about the profound loneliness, the hours of isolation, the moments when he questions whether any of this effort serves any purpose. These things would only worry her, and worry serves no one. The second letter is from his publisher, Schmeitzner, and it's not pleasant reading. Sales of Human, All Too Human, have been disappointing. The book is not finding its audience. Schmeitzner is losing money on Nietzsche's publications and is questioning whether to continue their arrangement. He's diplomatic about it, couching his concerns in business language, but the message is clear. Nietzsche's books don't sell, and that's a problem. This letter is harder to answer. Nietzsche knows his work is difficult, knows it challenges readers, knows it won't achieve popularity. But he also believes, has to believe, that it has value, that it will eventually find the readers it needs. His response to Schmeitzner is defensive, pointing out that important books often sell slowly at first, that future generations will recognize the work's significance, that patience is required. Even as he writes these reassurances, doubt gnaws at him. What if the publisher is right? What if these books are simply bad, poorly conceived, inadequately executed? What if his isolation has led him so far from normal thought that he's lost the ability to communicate with anyone? He finishes the letter to Schmeitzner without fully addressing these doubts. Admitting uncertainty to his publisher would be fatal to their relationship. He has to project confidence, has to convince Schmeitzner that continuing to publish his work is worthwhile, even if he's not entirely convinced himself. The third letter is different, more welcome. It's from one of the rare readers who is actually engaged with his work, a young student who's written with intelligent questions about the gay science. The letter is thoughtful, showing genuine understanding of what Nietzsche shows, is attempting. It's the kind of response he dreams of receiving more often, proof that someone somewhere is actually reading and thinking about his ideas. His response to this letter flows more easily, freed from the complications of familial duty or business anxiety. He can write philosophically, can engage with ideas, can feel for a moment like part of an intellectual community rather than an isolated hermit. He answers the students' questions, elaborates on concepts that were treated briefly in the book, suggests directions for further thought. As he writes, he becomes aware of how much he misses this kind of exchange, how much his isolation costs him intellectually. Philosophy, he's coming to understand, is not meant to be done alone. It emerges from dialogue, from the clash of ideas, from the testing of concepts against other minds. His solitude, chosen or imposed, limits him in ways he's only beginning to recognize. But then, what choice does he have? Academic life proved impossible. His health couldn't sustain it, and his ideas were too unconventional for the institution anyway. Social life in cities triggers his migraines and exhausts him. His few attempts at romantic connection have ended disastrously. This isolation, this hermitage in the mountains is not ideal, but it's what's possible. It's where he can work, where he can think, where he can produce the books that nobody reads. He finishes the third letter and sets down his pen. His hand is cramping again and his eyes are burning from the strain of reading and writing by lamplight. The correspondence is complete, or at least the essential responses are written. There are other letters that could be answered, other connections that could be maintained, but they'll have to wait. He has nothing left tonight. He seals the 3 letters, addresses them carefully, and sets them aside for posting tomorrow. They'll make their way through the Swiss postal system down the mountain to the wider world, carrying his words, his thoughts, his carefully curated version of himself. Outside, the rain has stopped and the night sky is beginning to clear. Through his window, he can see stars appearing, bright and cold in the mountain darkness. The sight brings a strange comfort. These distant lights that care nothing for human concerns, that shine regardless of his pain or his isolation or his struggles with publishers. He stands, stretches, trying to work out the stiffness from hours of sitting. His body is tired in multiple ways now. The physical fatigue from walking, the mental exhaustion from thinking and writing, the strain of maintaining correspondence, of presenting himself to the world as more functional than he feels. What he needs, what he deeply craves, is sleep. But sleep, as always, is uncertain. He can lie down, can close his eyes, can hope for unconsciousness, but whether it will come, and whether it will last, is anyone's guess. His nights are often broken, interrupted by pain or by thoughts that won't stop, by the strange twilight state where he's neither fully asleep nor fully awake. Still, he must try. The day cannot continue indefinitely. The body requires rest, even if it doesn't provide it easily. Tomorrow brings new challenges, new work, new walks, new struggles with health and isolation. To face tomorrow, he needs whatever rest tonight can provide. Before lying down, he conducts his evening ritual. He extinguishes the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. He removes his outer clothing, folding each piece carefully, habits of order maintained even in exhaustion. He lies on his narrow bed, pulling the thin blanket over himself. The room is very cold now. His breath makes small clouds in the darkness. But cold is acceptable. Cold is preferable to many alternatives. Cold keeps him alert, keeps thoughts clear, prevents the drowsiness that warmth brings. He lies still, listening to the village settling into night. And somewhere a dog barks. Somewhere farther a door closes. The normal sounds of human habitation, distant and separate from his solitary existence. His thoughts drift, losing their sharpness, becoming more associative, more dreamlike. This is the transition state, the sliding towards sleep if sleep will come. Images from the day float through his mind. The pyramidal stone, the gray lake, the rain, the lamplit pages. His mother's worried letter, the student's intelligent questions. And underneath it all, the persistent questions that never leave him. What is this life for? What do all these struggles mean? What value does suffering have? Can existence be affirmed even when it hurts? These are not questions that admit easy answers. They're questions to live with, to think through, to approach from multiple angles over years and decades. They're the questions that drive his philosophy, that make his isolation worthwhile, or at least, that make it mean something beyond mere retreat from a world that doesn't understand him. Friedrich Nietzsche lies in darkness in a small room in the Swiss Alps, his body aching, his mind still restless, trying to find whatever peace the night might offer. Tomorrow he'll wake, if sleep comes, and begin again. The walking, the writing, the thinking, the endless wrestling with ideas and with his failing flesh. But tonight, rest, or the attempt at rest, or at least the cessation of the day's labors, which is close enough to rest for someone who's forgotten what true rest feels like. The mountain darkness deepens, the stars wheel overhead, and somewhere between waking and sleeping, between thought and unconsciousness, Friedrich Nietzsche finally lets go of the day. But true sleep eludes him, as it so often does. After perhaps an hour of restless half-consciousness, Nietzsche finds himself fully awake again, lying in the dark with eyes open, staring at a ceiling he cannot see. This is familiar territory, these night hours, when the body demands rest, but the mind refuses to provide it. When consciousness becomes a burden rather than a gift. The headache, which had quieted during the evening, has returned with renewed vigor. It pulses behind his eyes in a rhythm that seems to mock the steady beating of his heart. Each pulse brings a wave of pain not quite unbearable but relentless, demanding attention, making sleep impossible. He lies very still, knowing from experience that movement often makes things worse. But stillness has its own problems. When he doesn't move, when there's no distraction, his thoughts begin to spiral, to turn inward, to pursue dark channels that daylight usually helps him avoid. Tonight the thoughts circle around failure and futility. What is he accomplishing really, with all this work? He's producing books that don't sell, developing ideas that nobody understands, living a life of self-imposed hardship in pursuit of goals he can't clearly articulate. Is this noble or merely foolish? Is he a prophet speaking to future generations, or a deluded man talking to himself? The darkness of the room seems to press in on him, to become physical weight. He feels the isolation acutely at night when the rest of the village sleeps and he alone lies awake with his pain and his questions. This is loneliness in its purest form. Not just the absence of others, but the sense of existing in a reality separate from normal human experience. His father died young from a brain condition that may have been similar to what afflicts the son. His brother died in infancy. The family history suggests a genetic weakness, a predisposition toward neurological problems. Is he following in his father's footsteps, doomed to an early death or madness? The thought has occurred to him before, more than once. He tries to push it away, but at night, when defenses are low, it returns. He thinks about the eternal recurrence, that idea that haunts him. If this moment, this exact moment of lying awake in pain in the dark, if this will repeat eternally, can he say yes to it? This is the test, the real test. Not the pleasant moments, not the successful writing sessions or the beautiful mountain vistas, but this, the pain, the insomnia, the doubt, the loneliness. Can he affirm this eternally? The honest answer at 3 in the morning with a migraine pounding behind his eyes is no. He cannot. He does not. This is suffering without meaning, pain without purpose. Existence is burden rather than gift. If this is eternal, if this will recur infinite times, then existence is cruel beyond measure. But then, he reminds himself, the test of eternal recurrence is not meant to be easy. It's meant to be the hardest test possible, the ultimate challenge. And maybe the point is not whether he can currently affirm this moment, but whether he can live in such a way that he could eventually affirm it, that he could transform even this suffering into something meaningful. His nausea is increasing. He recognizes the pattern. The migraine is escalating, moving from pain to the full constellation of symptoms that will make the next several hours truly miserable. He should get up, should try to vomit if vomiting will help, should not lie here passively accepting the body's betrayal. He sits up slowly, carefully, each movement calculated to minimize the spike of pain that sudden motion brings. The room spins slightly, vertigo adding to nausea, adding to pain. He waits for the spinning to stop, breathing deeply, trying to maintain control. The cold floor shocking his feet is almost a welcome sensation, a different kind of discomfort that momentarily distracts from the head pain. He stands, steadies himself, makes his way in darkness toward the window. Outside, the mountain night is clear now, the earlier clouds having moved on. Stars crowd the sky in numbers impossible to see in lowland areas, bright and cold and distant. He looks at the stars and thinks about scale, about perspective, about the insignificance of human concerns measured against cosmic time. These stars have been shining for millions of years, will continue shining for millions more, completely indifferent to whether one sick philosopher in Switzerland lives or dies, succeeds or fails, finds meaning or despairs. This thought could be crushing, could add existential dread to physical suffering, but somehow at this moment it's oddly comforting. His problems, his pain, his struggles, they're so small against such immensity. They matter, but they don't matter absolutely. They're real, but they're also temporary, local, contingent. The nausea reaches its peak, and he knows vomiting is inevitable. He makes his way to the basin, and his body rebels violently, expelling what little he ate for dinner. The heaving is painful, worsening the headache, but there's also a strange relief in it, a sense of the body purging itself, of pressure being released. Afterward, exhausted and shaking, he rinses his mouth with cold water, splashes his face, trying to wash away the sickness. His reflection in the small mirror is ghostly in the starlight filtering through the window. He looks like a specter, a haunted figure, someone already halfway to death. But he's not dead. He's alive, and as long as he's alive, there's work to do, thoughts to think, words to write. This is what sustains him through nights like this, not hope exactly, but purpose. The sense that his suffering might at least produce something, might at least leave a mark, might at least contribute to human understanding, even if no one currently cares. He returns to bed, lies down again, knowing sleep is probably impossible now, but needing at least to rest his body if his mind won't quiet. The headache continues its assault. The nausea has subsided, but not entirely. His stomach remains unsettled, threatening to rebel again. Hours pass in this state, neither sleeping nor fully waking, existing in the strange liminal space that chronic insomniacs know well. Sometimes his thoughts drift toward philosophy, toward the problems he's working through in his writing. Other times they're more fragmented, random associations, memories from distant past mixing with recent experiences. He thinks about his childhood, about growing up in a household of women after his father's death. His mother, his sister, his grandmother, his aunts. A small boy surrounded by feminine energy, by Christian piety that he absorbed and later rejected, by expectations he couldn't meet and rules he couldn't accept. He thinks about his years at university, about his unexpected early success in philology, about being offered a professorship at age 24 before he'd even completed his doctorate. That was supposed to be the beginning of a brilliant academic career. Instead, it was the peak, and everything since has been decline, retreat, the slow dismantling of conventional success in favor of something harder to name or measure. He thinks about Wagner, about that complex friendship that ended so badly, the hope he'd invested in Wagner as the artist genius who would redeem German culture, the disappointment when Wagner revealed himself to be all too human, all too conventional in his prejudices and his Christianity and his nationalism. The break was necessary but painful, and the wound hasn't fully healed, even years later. He thinks about Lou Andreas Salome, that brief, intense friendship that felt like it might become something more but ended in humiliation. His marriage proposal rejected. Her interest in him intellectual, but not romantic. His hurt feelings and jealousy creating a situation so uncomfortable that flight was the only option. He fled to these mountains, to this isolation, to this life where rejection is impossible because connection is impossible. The sky begins to lighten, almost imperceptibly at first. The eastern horizon shows the faintest hint of gray. The stars start to fade, and Nietzsche realizes he survived another night. Morning is coming, bringing with it the possibility of productive work, of mountain walks, of hours when he can do something beyond simply enduring. He has not slept, or barely slept, and the migraine still throbs and his body feels wrecked and exhausted. But morning is coming, and with morning comes the chance to begin again, to take up the work, to continue the endless labor of trying to think clearly, despite a body determined to prevent it. This is his life, suffering transformed into thought, pain transmuted into philosophy, isolation refined into insights that might someday reach readers who will understand. It's not the life he would have chosen at 20. It's not the life anyone would choose. But it's the life he has. And he's determined to make it mean something, even if that meaning remains obscure, even if the value of his work won't be recognized until after he's gone. The gray dawn light grows stronger. Another day is beginning in Sils-Maria. Friedrich Nietzsche lies in his narrow bed, exhausted and in pain, but preparing mentally for the day ahead. The walking awaits, the writing awaits, the endless struggle with ideas and illness awaits. He will get up soon, he will wash with cold water, he will drink warm milk, he will sit at his desk and try to write, he will walk for hours in the mountains, he will eat his simple meals, he will write letters, he will endure. Because that's what he does, that's what this life is. Endurance given philosophical meaning. Suffering transformed into affirmation. The daily choice to continue, to work, to think, to create, despite every reason to stop. The sun has not yet cleared the peaks, but its approach is certain. A new day is dawning, and with it comes another chance to say yes to existence, to affirm life even in its harshest forms, to live in such a way that if this day were to recur eternally, he could accept it without complaint. That's the goal, at least. The goal toward which he strives, even when he fails, even when he cannot affirm, even when yes seems impossible. The goal that gives meaning to suffering, purpose to isolation, value to a life that by conventional measures would be called failed. Friedrich Nietzsche greets another dawn in the Swiss Alps, another day of walking and writing and thinking and pain. The hermit of Sils-Maria, alone with his thoughts and his illness and his conviction that this suffering, this work, this life, matters somehow, means something, contributes to human understanding in ways that won't be recognized until long after he's gone. And so the day completes its circle, or rather, prepares to begin again, because for Nietzsche, there's no true completion, only the perpetual renewal of struggle, the constant return to the same challenges that define his existence. As gray dawn breaks over Sils-Maria one more time, as light begins its slow reclamation of the valley from night's darkness, another day awaits with its familiar burdens and its small, hard-won victories. This is the rhythm of his life in these productive years. The mid-1880s when he's creating the works that will eventually reshape philosophy. The pattern repeats with minor variations: wake in pre-dawn darkness, write until late morning, walk for hours regardless of weather, return to write more if health permits, correspond with the distant world, attempt sleep that rarely comes fully, lie awake with pain and philosophical questions that refuse to rest. It's a punishing schedule, a life stripped to its essentials, reduced to what matters most: the work, the thinking, the attempt to see clearly through the fog of suffering, to articulate truths about human existence that others haven't recognized or haven't dared to speak. The daily practice of self-overcoming, of pushing beyond what the body wants, beyond what would be comfortable, beyond what would be safe. We've spent one ordinary day with Friedrich Nietzsche, though ordinary is perhaps the wrong word, for a life so extreme, so driven, so defined by suffering and philosophical obsession in equal measure. An ordinary day for him would be an extraordinary ordeal for most people. The level of pain he accepts as background noise would send others to bed. The isolation he maintains as working condition would break most minds. The ideas he wrestles with in these mountain heights would seem abstract and distant to those occupied with normal concerns. But this is how philosophy happens, at least this kind of philosophy. Not in comfortable seminar rooms or prestigious universities, but here in a cold room in a remote village, by a man whose body betrays him hourly, who has sacrificed conventional success for the chance to think clearly, who has chosen or been forced into an isolation so complete that his only real conversations are with his own thoughts and the future readers he hopes will eventually understand. The work he's producing during these years will outlive him by centuries. Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, On the Genealogy of Morals, The Twilight of the Idols, works that will be read and debated and misunderstood and misused long after their author has died. Books that will influence writers and artists and philosophers and tragically political movements that would have horrified him. Ideas that will be quoted and misquoted, understood and wildly misinterpreted. But he doesn't know that yet. Right now, in these summer days of 1883 through 1888, he's just a sick man trying to complete the day's work before his body shuts down, trying to capture thoughts before migraines scatter them, trying to believe that this suffering serves some purpose beyond mere endurance. The question that haunts him, the question of eternal recurrence, is also the question that sustains him. If this day were to repeat infinite times, if this exact life with all its pain and isolation were to cycle eternally, could he affirm it? Could he say yes to this existence as it is without wishing it were otherwise, without demanding that it be easier or more rewarding or more recognized? Most days the honest answer is no. Most days the suffering outweighs whatever small satisfaction comes from completing a few pages of writing, from walking a few miles without complete physical breakdown, from surviving another migraine attack. Most days this life does not feel worth repeating even once, let alone eternally. But there are moments, brief and precious, when something shifts, when the walking produces an insight so clear and powerful that all the pain seems worthwhile, when the writing flows with such intensity that he forgets his body entirely, when the mountain landscape reveals itself in such beauty that existence itself seems justified. Moments when yes becomes possible, when affirmation isn't struggle, but spontaneous response. Those moments don't last. They can't last. The headaches return, the isolation presses in, the doubt resurfaces, and he's back to the daily grind of trying to function despite everything. But the moments exist. They happen. And they suggest the possibility that life, even difficult life, even painful life, contains something worth affirming. This is his gift to us. This message wrung from years of suffering in Swiss mountain villages. This philosophy forged in physical and mental extremity. That affirmation is possible even without comfortable circumstances. That meaning can be created even in isolation. That strength comes not from avoiding suffering, but from learning to say yes to it, to transform it, to use it as fuel for creation. Whether you agree with his philosophy or not, whether his ideas attract or repel you, there's something undeniable about the courage required to live as he lived, to think as he thought, to work as he worked, to choose, day after day, to continue when every physical signal says stop, when every conventional measure of success says you failed, when every reasonable person would say it's time to give up. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't give up. He continued walking his mountain paths, continued writing his difficult books, continued wrestling with questions about existence and meaning and value, continued trying to see clearly despite pain and isolation and every obstacle his body and his circumstances could throw at him. He continued for another 5 years before his final mental collapse in 1889, after which he lived another 11 years in a state of mental absence, cared for by his mother and sister but no longer capable of the philosophical work that had defined him. But before that collapse, before that darkness, came these years in Sils-Maria, these summers of intense productivity, these days of walking and writing and thinking that produced works that would echo through the coming century. Days like the one we've just witnessed. Ordinary days by his standards, extraordinary by any reasonable measure. The sun climbs higher now over the Engadin Valley, illuminating the peaks, warming the air, beginning another cycle of light and shadow, warmth and cold, motion and rest. The day's work awaits, the mountains await, the blank pages await, and somewhere in a small room on Via da Marias, Friedrich Nietzsche prepares to begin again, to take up the tools of his trade, to continue the endless labor of trying to understand human existence through the lived experience of its harshest forms. If you enjoyed this journey into a day in Nietzsche's life, If this glimpse into the daily reality of philosophical work spoke to you, then please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these deep dives into history possible. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing this community stretch across time zones and continents. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and remember, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Though Nietzsche would be the first to admit that sometimes what doesn't kill you just leaves you exhausted and in pain, and that's okay too. That's part of being human. That's part of life. And maybe, just maybe, it's something we can learn to affirm. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.